Life over coffee. Conversations for transformation.
I was doing a conference recently, and at some point during my talk, I made the statement that I am an introvert. That is who I am. That's who I always have been. That is how God has made me. I'm not a talking person. And of course, when I said that afterward, there was a gentleman that came up to me and said, Well, I'm really surprised that you are a non talker, and I am too. And so he was sharing with me about how difficult it is for him to talk. And so I shared a little bit about, how God changed me and why I changed, etc. And then on the flight home, I was thinking, it would probably be a good idea if I just put this in a podcast, because there are a lot of non-talkers out there. There are a lot of introverts. Now, I'm using the word introvert in a euphemistic way. That's not the language that we would typically use, but everybody understands what it is. And so basically what I'm talking about is that I'm not a talker. I am a quiet person. When it comes to socializing, that's not my jam. That's not my bag. That's not something that I want to do. I prefer to be quiet. That is who I am traditionally, historically. I've always been that way. When Lucy and I got married, I told her that you're in charge of the social calendar, because if I'm in charge of the social calendar, then we're not going anywhere. We'll probably never do anything. We'll stay at home all the time. Lucy was a social butterfly. She's always been that way. It is amazing at the amount of words that she can use. Sometimes when we're in a meeting, I just sit back and watch her talk. She's a northern girl, meaning that she likes unsweetened tea, but I've almost domesticated her to the southern way of living, and so she will drink sweet tea now. But when she drinks sweet tea, she has a whole other gear as far as her communication style. She can really up her word count when she's interacting with others. Now, I see that as a gift. Now, when we first started dating some 30 years ago, I saw that as intimidating. In fact, I broke up with her one time because of that, because I thought there is no way that I'm going to be able to keep up with her. My goodness, this girl can talk, and it was just overpowering because, again, I am a quiet person. I prefer to be reclusive. I prefer to be out of action. I prefer to be the second person, not the lead person. That's always been my style. I've always been that way. Now, people don't know that. And of course, when I meet people on Facebook that I went to school with 100 years ago, and they haven't seen me in all these decades, and they see what I'm doing for a living, some of them actually write. And I remember one in particular who said, Ricky, my jaw is still on the ground. Now, he would never call me Rick because that's not my name. My name is Ricky. And so he knew me as a kid. He knew me as middle grade and high school. And he knew that I didn't say anything, that I was always distant, always aloof, always out of the action, out of the fray, unless I was stirring up trouble, of course. But when he sees me now, all these decades later, he is just shocked because he knows who I am. Ricky does not communicate. Well, I became a Christian at 25 years of age, and then in process of time, I had to come to terms with the gospel. And the gospel is about going. The gospel has a radical edge to it. I could not be obedient to the Great Commission, going and making disciples, without communicating. Communication is leadership. The person who doesn't talk is not leading, is not a leader, and cannot lead, because you cannot lead without words. God leads us with His words. He gives us the Word, and it leads us. Without His Word, we would not know what to do. We would not know about Him. We would have no action plan. We would be fumbling around as blind people in the dark, groping against the wall. But God has given us His Word. He is a communicating, speaking God. And so I had to come to the realization that, one, I could not obey the Great Commission, going and making disciples, without being a communicator. And then I had to come to terms with the 613 laws in the Old Testament, all summed up in two: loving God and loving others. How could I love God and love others in quietness? And so I couldn't use the excuse that this is the way that God has made me, this is who I am a non-talker, my personality is this way. And I've heard that all my life from other people. And no one has really, many of those people, I don't say no one, but many of them have not been challenged that no, you need to change. You need to repent. And when I say repent, I am not talking about becoming a chatty Cathy. I am not talking about becoming that person that talks all the time, the individual that sells cars or whatever. I'm not talking about walking in the room leading with your mouth, becoming something that's different from you. You can be who you are, but there are some changes that you can make. Meaning that when you are born physically, you are who you are, but you mature, and that's what I'm talking about. And so I can still maintain my personality, but I can mature, and one of the areas where I am weak and needing to mature is in the area of communication, and so I had to repent. And I know that many other people are like that as well. One of the things that confuses people is what I do for a living, like I am talking now. There are three, maybe I can put this in three categories. One of those categories is the person who does public speaking. And this is the part that confuses many people. You do public speaking. But here's the thing. Public speaking is a monologue context where I am in complete control of the narrative. That's what public speaking is. It's not a dialogue. Where I am weak is socially in a dialogue context. That is the struggle for me, being in a dialogue type interactive context. That is the area that needs the most growth. The low-hanging fruit is to speak publicly in a monologue context. That is the low-hanging fruit because I am in control. And you will see this with, maybe you've heard this, I have, that people like Robin Williams, for example, he was a comedian that many of you know from a generation or two back. But he was hilarious. He was a communicator, but he was deeply insecure and a dysfunctional soul, even to the point to where he took his life. He committed suicide, which is sad. But that is confusing to people because it looks like this is the life that I want to emulate. I mean, here's a bold, confident person. But what you don't see is that that person is monologuing. They're hiding in plain sight. They are communicating to you or communicating to us. He did it through comedy. I do it through what I do for a living. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm a social creature, because I'm not. It takes work for me to be social. People like Lucia, it doesn't take work at all. It is a gift. And when you're working within your gift, it's not that difficult to do. But for those that have to work to do the work of communicating, it is very tiring. It is very exhausting. When I finish a conference, when I finish doing podcasts like this, I am tired. I am exhausted because I have to get up to do this. I have to really work myself up to do it because it's not who I am from a personality perspective. Our ministry could be a whole lot more successful if I wasn't leading it. If I had that charismatic personality and was just, could get out there and do it and make things happen in a communicative kind of way, our ministry could flourish even more. But I am just a very laid back individual, monolithic, monotone person, and I'm just not that charismatic personality. So to be that is very difficult. And so one level of communication is monologuing. And again, you can hide in plain sight. It gives the persona that you're a communicating kind of person, but in reality, I'm not. Another level of communication is what I call strangers on the train. Now, I didn't coin that phrase, but nevertheless, I have embraced it. And this is a person who communicates in dialogue, but they communicate to strangers. They never meet a stranger. They can talk to anyone. But all of these relationships, those types of relationships, are risk-free. You can walk up to any person. That's why somebody would say, well, you're very transparent when you communicate at a conference, or you're very transparent when you talk to this stranger that you just met. Well, that is true, and it's true. It is transparent. But both of those situations are risk-free relationships virtually. I'm going to go home and never see these people again. And when I meet the stranger on the train, the man on the street, I can have a 1-hour conversation, and I can be completely vulnerable and transparent and honest with him. And it is refreshing. And both of us could go away and say, we had a wonderful dialogue, and we went deep, and it was refreshing, and it was fantastic. And why can't we do this at our church? Well, okay, so there's a third level of conversation. It's not monologuing in a pulpit, and it's not the stranger on the train effect, but it's actually your interactive relationships, the people that you meet on a daily basis that you do life with. That's where it's very risky. That's where it's hard to be vulnerable. That's where it's a challenge to be transparent. And so the people that you live with, between husband and wife, or the greater family dynamic with children involved, or at the local church, or in small group, because you've got to come back and you're going to meet them again. And the transparency that you shared today will always be there, and you'll add more to it the next time. And so there's a growing transparency that can be very uncomfortable with individuals. There's a vulnerability, and in a cumulative way, that can be very difficult for people. And so it's easier to talk to strangers, and it's easier, even though people talk about doing oral communication, public speaking. Yeah, it's hard as far as stage fright is concerned, and you'll get over that in time. I've been communicating publicly in oral communication, public speaking, since 1985. I've been doing it for a long time, and so I don't necessarily get nervous when I get up to do public speaking. And so that part, that's over. But it's easy to talk in that monologue format. It's easy to meet the stranger on the train. I never meet a stranger. Everybody is a friend, and we have wonderful conversations, and then we go on about our lives. Theoretically, we never meet again. But being vulnerable, being transparent within a community that you do life in, day out, that's where we can hit the introvert button. We can take on, this is the way God has made me, and we can retreat and not be communicative. Now that has to change. Now, I've been asking the Lord to help me change that about me for decades now, and He has. And I will communicate in a dialogue context in ongoing relationships. That is the most difficult, that's the highest degree of difficulty in communicating with people that you do life with on a regular basis, ongoing, growing in transparency and vulnerability. And so I want to talk about that for just a few moments. And if you want to read my show notes, you can go to episode 509, and I've titled it A Gospel Message for All the Introverts Out There. Now, in this title, this is the point that you'll have to really wrestle with, the gospel. Am I going to be obedient to the gospel? The gospel is about going. The gospel is always from subject to object. God so loved the world. And so the direction is going away from us. We have to love others more than love God and others as we love ourselves. And so there is this heightened awareness that has to be in our minds that in order to obey the Great Commission in your marriage, in your extended family with children, and within your church and within your community, if you're going to obey the Great Commission and be a disciple maker of all the people within your sphere of influence, you got to talk. You got to communicate. And either you're going to be obedient to the gospel or not. Overcoming the challenges of introversion involves embracing how God uniquely designed you. And I want to talk about that in just a moment. So I'm not asking you to become another kind of person. You are unique. God made you this way, and that's okay. You're a person with a limited word count. By the way, those people who are the chatty Cathys out there and who seem to have an unlimited word count, they have a whole nother type of problem. They need to be quick to listen and slow to speak. They need to communicate less. They need to practice getting into people's lives. And they have a hard time doing that because they're talking all the time. And so they don't leave any space for the other person to communicate because they're filling up the airspace by communicating a lot. You will also find a lot of insecure people who are chatty Cathys, and they're hiding in plain sight as well. They're using communication to keep from having a transparent dialogue with someone because they're always on the offensive, so to speak, by their words, and so you can't get a word in edgewise. And so the person who talks too much needs to change, and the person who talks too little needs to change. But it doesn't mean becoming something that you are not. It means becoming more mature than what you are today. And so that is an important distinction to make. And while you are embracing how God uniquely designed you, you're seeking ways to engage others in meaningful, God-honoring ways. And so it's not about changing who you are, but rather using your natural tendencies for the glory of God and the good of others. And so I want to walk through just 5 steps that I trust that would be beneficial for you, introverts, as you think about obeying the gospel and asking God to change you, to mature your uniqueness into something that's a little bit more communicative without changing you altogether. Number 1, understand your design. Understand your design. Recognize that being an introvert is part of how God has crafted you. It's a reflection of His design. And so I would not want you to think that you're weird. And sometimes people fall into the trap of comparing themselves with other people. That's exactly what I did with my wife. When we were dating, I compared myself to her, and I thought, I can't keep up. I can't be that. I'm not going to be able to hold my own. And it was so powerful to me, and my insecurity was so strong that I just figured the best thing for me to do was to uncouple from this dating relationship. And so I did. I wrote her a letter and said, basically, we're breaking up. And so we broke up. Now, if you want to know how that story ended, it ended pretty well. We got married and had 3 children, and we love each other, and we're maturing together rather nicely. But in the beginning, there were some bumps, and many, but one of those was tied to this comparison thing that I had going on, and I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. I wasn't comfortable in how God crafted me. And so we want to reflect God in how He designed us. Now, one of the things that does is that it allows you to have a unique perspective and unique contributions into your relationship. So point number 1, understand your design, not somebody else's. Understand your design and embrace your design as part of God's good plan for you. Now, what that means is that you do have a different perspective. You think differently. You reflect more. You have other thoughts that's not like the other person. You may be slower to speak, but you have to speak. And when you do, you will say it differently than other people. And so all you have to do, 1, recognize your unique design. 2, recognize that you are normal. 3, God has made you this way. But you do have to deal with the reality that this idea of not communicating doesn't mean you should not communicate any longer. No, you communicate according to the uniqueness of who you are. That leads to number 2, step out in faith. Okay, this is how God made you, and so you're not going to be that talking head. That's fine. Don't become that person. Become who you are and grow into a greater version of who you are. Step number 2, step out in faith. Challenge yourself to step outside of your comfort zone incrementally. And so you don't have to jump off a cliff, but you do want to take baby steps. And when I say step out of your comfort zone, what I'm talking about here is the comfort zone is your is your box of self-reliance. It is a self-described world in which you live in. And inside that world, it says that I am an introvert, and this is how introverts are. And so you create a world in which you are comfortable living inside of that world. That's what I mean by not maturing. To mature, you've got to grow that box bigger incrementally. And as that box grows, as your world expands, you're going to start communicating. Part of that expansion is going to be communicating. Now, this could mean we're under point number 2, stepping out in faith. This could mean that you're initiating a conversation to where you go up and you just initiate a conversation. Now, maybe one of the ways that you can baby step this is by talking to someone who can carry a conversation. By the way, those tend to be my friends. Most of my friends are people who enjoy talking. Most of my friends are talkers. I typically don't make friends with non-talkers, or those friends that I make who are non-talkers, they're a lot harder to make friends with, because when I go up to a person who doesn't talk like me, we both end up staring at our shoes because neither one of us is going to carry the heavy lifting of conversing with one another. Now, I don't do that anymore. That's the way that I used to be. And so I don't stare at my shoes or his shoes, but I can draw out the non-talker. I've learned how to talk, basically, is what I'm saying. But in the beginning, we're just staring at each other's shoes. And so maybe it would be best, as you step out in faith and you initiate conversation, that you do that with a talker. You practice conversing with a talker, maybe joining a small group at your church or participating in a community service. Some people have signed up for Toastmasters in order to learn to do public speaking, but you have to realize that you can become very comfortable in public speaking and not grow in your social gifting because it's monologue, not dialogue. And so we're talking about dialogue. And so participating in community events or some community service to where you have to engage other people. Now again, in community service, it's all about strangers on the train. These will not typically not be long-term ongoing relationships, but at least you're practicing dialogue, not monologue. And so each small step is an act of faith and a way to trust God to use your efforts, and God will work with you as you engage Him. And so this is titled A Gospel Message for All the Introverts Out There. Step number 1, understand your design. You are uniquely made. Don't become something you're not, but mature according to how God made you. Number 2, step out in faith. Number 3, seek solitude for recharging, because this is not who you are. As an introvert, solitude can be rejuvenating. I find it that way. Again, when I do public speaking, like the thing that I want to do after public speaking is I want to go take a nap. And many times that I do. When I'm doing a 9-hour one-day conference where I'm talking for 9 hours, and most of that is public speaking, but after I come down from public speaking, somebody's always wanting to engage me, and I love that. That's fine. I want to serve, not be served. But after 8 or 9 hours of that, I want to go to bed. I mean, I want to take a nap because I'm not the Energizer Bunny where I'm just like my battery's recharging the more I talk. That's not how that works. I think for my wife, it actually does. She's rejuvenated. She has one of those regenerative batteries that you have in a car. And the more you drive it, the stronger the battery becomes. The more I drive, the more exhausted I become. And so my needle is going toward empty while hers is getting fuller. And so make sure that you seek solitude for recharging. I love taking walks by myself. I love spending time by myself. I love being alone. And I call it hiding. I love hiding. Now, because of the public nature of what I do, after all of these years, I do find that I do have to hide in Walmart and other places as I interact with people. because people see you, they want to talk, and it's fine. I am not complaining at all. It's the cost of doing business. It's just the way it is, and I'm fine with it. I really am. However, I know that I need to rest, and so I do guard my calendar appropriately, biblically. Time management is a thing, and I use time for rest. But it's not just for rest, it's for spiritual renewal through prayer, through meditation on Scripture, reflecting on God and His work, and the things where I can grow and how I can change. And so it prepares you actually to interact with others out of an overflow of your relationship with God. Now, this would be true also for the talkers. If they do not seek solitude, maybe not for recharging, which is what point number 3 here is, but seek solitude for working on a different kind of overflow, because a lot of times those who talk don't say anything. They just jabber on and on and on. They don't say anything. And so there's no overflow of their relationship with God because they don't have a relationship with God. And so whether you are a talker or a non-talker, you do need to seek solitude so that we can recalibrate our hearts. For those of us who don't talk, we recalibrate our bodies as well because we need rest. But for the talkers, you have to recalibrate so you're working out of the overflow, and that overflow is your relationship with God. Number 4, use your gifts. Use your gifts through communication. So often, and this is what I mean, introverts typically are reflective and observant people. Being an introvert is actually the gift that God has given me. Going back to point number 1, it is how God designed me. And being a quiet person is a gift because with quietness comes a maturity in reflective thought and observance of other people. And you'll find that with introverted, it's actually introspective people, because quiet people spend time thinking. Now, if you are taking time away to rejuvenate spiritually, then your thinking will be okay. The curse of introverted people is they can get lost in their heads. And that's why you want to pull away and make sure that you're recalibrating your mind in a God-centered way, not a self-centered way. Because if you're not recalibrating your mind in a God-centered way, you can get lost in your head because that processor, it never turns off, and your reflective thoughts can actually be a curse that can turn against you. And so as a quiet person, use your gifts of reflection and observance. Use these gifts to benefit others, perhaps by writing, encouraging cards, emails, text, offering thoughtful insights during Bible studies, listening well in one-on-one settings. You could do what I do, biblical counseling, not recommending that. I'm just saying that it's an option out there. But typically quiet people have that gift of reflection because they spend time reading the room more than the person who walks in the room with the mouth open. And so again, point number 4, after you step out in faith, use your gifts. God has given you a mind, and so you want to communicate. Using those gifts to impact others. And then number 5, focus on love. Remember that biblical love is about action and choice, not merely feelings. Like, I don't feel like it, I don't want to, or fear of man is creeping up on me and clawing me back, bringing me back into this old trap that I used to be in, to where I was just terrified about speaking to others and communicating. And so remember, biblical love is about action and choice, not merely our feelings. And so you want to make sure as a reflective person, as an introspect person, that we are listening to the right things. And that's why you want to be recalibrated to God. I think it was D. Martin Lloyd Jones that said, we need to stop listening to ourselves and start talking to ourselves. And so maybe the first person that you need to talk to is yourself, as David did in Psalm 103. as he was saying, bless the Lord, O my soul, he's talking to his soul. And so maybe the first communication is, or the ongoing dialogue is, you need to talk to your soul and tell your soul to get out there and to take action steps that you choose to obey God, the Great Commission of going and making disciples, loving Him and loving others as you love yourself, and not submitting yourself to these old feelings that I'm just an introvert and I don't have anything to say and I'm afraid to talk. And once you have that processor going around in your mind, it can form a stronghold that you would have to take captive and demolish before it takes captive of you. And so choosing to engage with others, even when it's uncomfortable, is a powerful way to demonstrate God's love through your actions. And so each of these 5 steps involves relying on God's strength and seeking His guidance through prayer and the wisdom of Scripture. Remember, it's not about becoming someone else, but it's about fulfilling the role that God has for you as you are. This is episode 509, a gospel message for all the introverts out there.
Thanks for joining us. Learn more and get access to other resources at lifeovercoffee.com.